how hers is different from an evolution of Jung's work,
Right.
to see the condition as experiencing schizophrenia, but not necessarily being it.
Right.
That's something that can be, you can come out of.
Okay, now why has this not come up on YouTube? Oh, it says live on YouTube.
Yeah, I've got actually that's the record doc.
There it is. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock in the East. Do you know where your children are? Anyway, here we are. The first thing I want to say in today's session to the YouTube audience is that yesterday, the latest volume of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, which is volume 5, Searching for Soul in the 21st Century. It's edited by Mary Stein, and it's the Aranos meeting last May, which I paid for but didn't get to attend, and they wouldn't give me my money back. But that's beside the point.
We both had one of those last year.
Yeah, no kidding.
I didn't ask for it back. I left it on the table for admin, but yours, that was probably a little bit of chunk.
Right. And my main mentor, I was originally going to this conference in 2020 when COVID broke out. And one of the first victims of COVID was an important mentor to me, whose name was Thomas Arst. And he was the co-editor of this series with Mary Stein. So we have Thomas to thank for getting the whole series going and editing much of it with Murray. But now we have volume 5, which will be the last volume. And these volumes really tell you something about what the Red Book is about. And so I urge you to buy the latest volume. Let's see, there it is. Red Book for Our Time and the Aranos Symposium. Now, the list of authors in this volume is a who's who of the clinical psychology team of Jungian analysts. So it includes people who have been presidents or chairman of Pacifica Graduate Center and many others. So good morning, Art. Nice to see you today. So I'm going to read just one page from Murray Stein's essay, because he has set the Red Book as a mystery play. And so he's describing it in several headings. The first is the setting of the play, then the dramatis personae and the creation of an inner world, curtain up, and the protagonist play, and then the first encounter, and then the final encounter and climax of the play in the garden with Christ. And Murray is sort of an international treasure at this point. He's a teaching analyst in Zurich, and he's both, I believe he's a doctor of divinity and a doctor of psychology, or a PhD in psychology.
Interesting.
Pardon?
With the garden there. I saw a cartoon this week that had Adam and Eve sitting down on the other side of the tree of knowledge, back on the tree, and Adam says, "Honey, what gives?" She goes, "It wasn't the apple. That wasn't the problem. It's when I ate that mushroom that the snake started talking."
Oh boy.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, but
So professional Jungians talk about the Red Book as Liber Novus, which means new book. I have some angst about that because I think that new book was embossed on the back cover of Jung's leather-bound copy, and therefore I don't consider it part of the title, but most Jungians do. So when I say Liber Novus, I mean the Red Book.
and I had a thought about that this week because I'm in complete agreement that I think that came with the book. That's just like going to the art supply store and that's embossed in gold or whatever, metal
Yeah,
color.
it says diary or something like that on the back of it.
2023 calendar, anything like that. So it's nothing more than that. But it's interesting. After yesterday, I started thinking about the Liber Novus piece of that puzzle, and instead of, I didn't lose any of my skepticism that just came on the book. That's that. But there was a piece that came to me where Jungians, in a sense, are inherently not in the silo in the first place, because you can go through a whole psychology program and get a PhD, and the word Carl Jung may never be mentioned once.
Right.
And so you get a lot of clinical psychology people. It's like, well, what about Jung? And they'll say, who?
Yeah,
and,
right.
And so new book fits. So
yeah.
In that way. So
okay, well, obviously he was an important writer because we've been talking about him for years on this YouTube channel, and but I want to put it in context. So I'm going to read just one page: Acts of Imagination, Creation of the Inner World by Mary Stein. And the subtitle for part 1 is Liber Novus Mystery Play, The Setting. The story of the mystery play, Liber Novus, begins on the night of November 12th, 1913. The immediate physical setting of the first scene is C.G. Jung's private office in his home in Kusnacht, a small village on Lake Zurich, some 8 kilometers south of the city, which is the bustling business center of Switzerland, a city of banks, captains of industry, 2 universities, a grand opera house, and the famous Bergholzli psychiatric clinic. The spirit of the time, Zeitgeist, rules supreme here, where it dictates its principles imperiously and proudly according to the highest standards of modern European culture. For the German-speaking Swiss, this Zeitgeist is inspired by the nation to the north, Deutschland, famed for its science, its philosophers, Kant, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche, its classical music, and its skeptical and subversive attitude toward religious belief and experience, Goethe, Feuerbach, and Marx. The bitter conflict between science and religion is still active in these times, a culture war that destroyed, as Jung witnessed, his pastor father's vocational life. This spirit of the time bears the name modernity, and Jung is caught up in it, as are all of his contemporaries. The dialogue back and forth in the text of Liber Novus between imaginatio, true imagination, as the alchemists called this faculty, and cognitatio, the rational understanding that flows from the reflection on the meaning of the acts of imagination, constitutes this work's methodology, and it will continue to be the same later in Jung's scientific work, both for theorizing and for clinical practice. This reversal of mental functions amounted to a critique of the Enlightenment and modern scientific thinking. But clearly for Jung, it did not mean the elimination of rational thinking. A bust of the emblematic savant of the French Enlightenment, Voltaire, remained prominently installed and displayed on the tile stove in his library, but he was joined in the room by the works of the alchemists on the shelves to his left, and the imaginal Philemon hovering invisibly in the background. The rational analytical mind became the servant, not the master, of the work undertaken by true imagination, the creative force of the self. Okay, so the important thing here is the creative force of the self, because that relates to why my colleagues and I have been organizing our confluences since about 2 years ago. The first one was in June in Helena, Montana. The second one is forthcoming on the 13th to 16th of October, 2023, and it will be conducted at Mount Madonna Retreat Center in Watsonville, California. I hope you can join us. So anyway, that is my preface here, and it's partially to put in context what we are reading, which is the reader's edition of the Red Book in translation. So,
well, and I think I'm glad you started us out this morning with that essay, because when you get to the imaginatio, that's the creative force of the self, and it's in the sense master of no master, because then the cognitatio is simply a utility. It's the vessel that would be akin to the ego, the psychological containment system that gives the form to the formlessness.
right.
And I think then, the imaginatio is then that which is poured into the vessel from the creative wellspring, Colleen's quadrant 3, and that creative wellspring is filled directly from the unconscious, and there's that creative force of the self.
Right. And so we are pursuing the creative aspect, and basically what Jung is saying is that if you live a fully rational life, then you're living somebody else's life. You're living down the rails of lives that have come before you that have created a civilization. But we still have the primitive, our instinctual selves underneath all that. And in order to understand your own life and be creative about it, you have to break that down and look at your own self and start finding ways to get to who you are, and how to find your own way in the world, because we're all different and we all have our own little bugaboos and problems. I discovered this morning that I have a floater in my right eye. God knows how long or what that's going to cause, but in any way.
Well, and I think that's a great point about, this essay is a really good start, because besides the creative force of the self, and you're talking about how the self develops. And yesterday, it was Dr. Maram had mentioned affect a bunch, and it's not
Right.
affect, it's affect, and that comes from affect regulation. And affect is external force, and affect regulation is how you deal with those, which necessarily deals with the psychological energetic containment vessel, otherwise known as the ego. And in terms of the origin of the self, I'm in the middle of this, and affect regulation and the origin of the self, and the subline is the neurobiology of emotional development. And what's interesting is I think that all comes together with then the creative force of the self, and how the imaginatio is that master that doesn't have a position. It's just simply the origin, as it were.
Right. So Murray in this segment was talking about the creative power, and it's only when you start to have an imagination, and very often it can come at a crisis in your life. It normally does, in fact, where something breaks down. I was having a very rational life, which included becoming a Marine Corps officer, becoming a lawyer, becoming an MBA. And I thought I would have it made in my career. And in many ways, I did have it made for the first 39 years of my life, because all that stuff led me to beginning an international business career, which was quite successful. It involved founding a company that became a public company. And that was all well and good, but I got to age 40 and all of a sudden, boom, all of that fell apart. And my life just got turned upside down. And it was at that point that a colleague drew my attention to Jung, and he's been my analyst ever since, and has helped pull me through it. And so my creative work has been to help others understand what he's talking about. And that's what I've been doing since 2010. So we're going to begin with this segment, which is chapter 3 of the Red Book on the Service of the Soul. I'm going to read the first page or so, and then I'll let you read the italicized part, which comes next. But you can comment on what I read first. So I'm going to go for about one page. On the Service of the Soul. On the following night, I had to write down all the dreams that I could recollect, true to their wording. The meaning of this act was dark to me. In other words, he didn't understand it. Why all this? Forgive the fuss that rises in me, yet you want me to do this. What strange things are happening to me? I know too much not to see on what swaying bridges I go. Where are you leading me? And this is on November 5th, 1913. So November 15th, 1913. So it's about 9 months before World War I broke out.
And I think that's an important sentence. I know too much to not see on what swaying bridges I go, meaning I have this literally top-heavy intellect. And you're asking me to go on this tricky place where balance is the forte, or, at the fore. So in a sense, he's preambling I'm going to have to not put so much emphasis on my intellect.
Right, exactly. So where are you leading me? Forgive my excessive apprehension, brimful of knowledge. My foot hesitates to follow you. Into what mist and darkness does your path lead? Must I also learn to do without meaning? If this is what you demand, then so be it. This hour belongs to you. What is there where there is no meaning? What is there when there is no meaning? Only nonsense or madness, it seems to me. Is there also a supreme meaning? Is that your meaning, my soul? I limp after you on crutches of understanding. I am a man and you stride like a god. What torture! I must return to myself, to my smallest things. I saw the things of my soul as small, pitiably small, pitiably small. You force me to see them as large, to make them large. Is that your aim? I follow, but it terrifies me. Hear my doubts, otherwise I cannot follow, since your meaning is a supreme meaning, and your steps are the steps of a god. I understand I must not think either should thought to no longer be. I should give myself completely into your hands. But who are you? I do not trust you. Not once to trust is that my love for you, my joy in you. Not once to trust. Is that my love for you, to my joy in you? Do I not trust every valiant man and not you, my soul? So I'm going to read that again. Do I not trust every valiant man and not you, my soul? Your hand lies heavy on me, but I will. Have I not sought to love men and trust them? And should I not do this with you? Forget my doubts. I know it is ignoble to doubt you. You know how difficult it is for me to set aside the beggar's pride I take in my own thought. I forgot that you are also one of my friends and have the first right to my trust. Should what I give them not belong to you? I recognize my injustice. It seems to me that I despised you. My joy at finding you again was not genuine. I also recognize that the scornful laughter in me was right. I must learn to love you. Should I also set aside self-judgment? I am afraid. Then the soul spoke to me and said, this fear testifies against me. It is true. It testifies against you. It kills the holy trust between you and me. And there's a footnote. In Black Book 2, Jung noted here someone stands beside me and whispers terrible things into my ear. You write to be printed and circulated among people. You want to cause a stir through the unusual. Nietzsche did this better than you. You are imitating Saint Augustine. The reference is to Augustine's Confessions, a devotional work written when he was 45 years old, in which he narrates his conversion to Christianity in an autobiographical form. The Confessions are addressed to God and recounts the years of wandering from God and the manner of his return. Echoing this in the opening sections of Liber Novus, Jung addresses his soul and recounts the years of his wandering away from her and the manner of his return. In his published works, Jung frequently cited Augustine and referred to his confession several times in Transformation and Symbols of the Libido, which was first published in English as Psychology of the Unconscious. Okay, so that's what I'm going to read. Jordan, your turn to talk.
Well, you know, it's interesting that in that first paragraph, when he says, my foot hesitates to follow you, there's again the preamble before of, you know, I'm too top heavy in the intellect and you're asking me to walk in these swaying bridges. And then now my foot hesitates to follow you. Again, still hesitates. It's a conscious thought. I mean, he's thinking rationally. And what's interesting is there's then the second indication that not that he's too top heavy. Now he has to learn to walk differently. And it reminds me of when I began learning the stealth step in martial arts. And instead of walking heel to toe, you walk toe to heel. And what's interesting is in every single step, you're conscious, but you're testing. Is the rock going to be tippy? Is it going to go tap, tap and make a noise and give your location up? But what happens is when it's not, you continue, and then you put the whole rest of your foot down. And what's interesting about that is in every step, there's this stepping into the not knowing to rationally know if you should comfortably settle into the not knowing. So, and then in a sense, that second step, not still comfortable with the not knowing, but learning how to navigate differently by tricking your brain to have to work through the feet rather than work through the thoughts. And so I'll go ahead and read as it goes forward.
Okay, now this is in italics, what Jung is going to read now.
So how hard is fate? If you take a step towards your soul, you will at first miss the meaning. You will believe that you have sunk into meaninglessness, into eternal disorder. You will be right. Nothing will deliver you from disorder and meaninglessness, since this is the other half of the world. Your God is a child. So long as you are not childlike, is the child order meaning or disorder, caprice? Disorder and meaninglessness are the mother of order and meaning. Order and meaning are things that have become and are no longer becoming. You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the order to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning, beyond meaning, and meaninglessness. You are afraid to open the door? I was too afraid, since we have forgotten that God is terrible. Christ taught, God is love, but you should know that love is also terrible. I spoke to a loving soul, and I drew nearer to her. I was overcome by horror, and I heaped up a wall of doubt and did not anticipate that I thus wanted to protect myself from my fearful soul. You dread the depths. It should horrify you, since the way of what is to come leads through it. You must endure the temptation of fear and doubt, and at the same time acknowledge to the bone that your fear is justified and your doubt is reasonable. How otherwise could it be a true temptation and a true overcoming? Christ totally overcomes the temptation of the devil, but not the temptation of God to good and reason. Christ thus succumbs to cursing. This is footnote here. He refers to the first letter of John, that God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him, from John 4:16. Let me read that. Christ totally overcomes the temptation of the devil, but not the temptation of God to good and reason. Christ thus succumbs to cursing. You still have to learn this, to succumb to no temptation, but to do everything of your own will, and then you will be free and beyond Christianity. I have had to recognize that I must submit to what I fear. Yes, even more that I must even love what horrifies me. We must learn such from that saint who was disgusted by the plague infections. She drank the pus of plague boils and became aware that it smelled like roses. The acts of the saint were not in vain. In everything regarding your salvation and the attainment of mercy, you are dependent on your soul. Thus, no sacrifice can be too great for you. If your virtues hinder you from salvation, discard them, since they have become evil to you. The slave to virtue finds the way as little as the slave to vices. If you believe that you are the master of your soul, then become her servant. If you were her servant, make yourself her master. Since she needs to be ruled, these should be your first steps. And I think what's interesting there is the back and forth at the end of master and servant, in a bigger picture, indicated neither is either. And from that to when he talks about nature and meaning and order, what I love is nature needs no order. Nature is order. And a lot of people refer to chaos, which is simply unadulterated nature. And in a sense, nature has no emotions. It only has weather that washes through. So I think that last piece, if I read it again, if you believe that you are the master of your soul, then become her servant. If you are her servant, make yourself her master, since she needs to be ruled. These should be your first steps. And I think what's interesting there to me is that wherever you are, you've probably societally, collectively, and consciously been then pushed to some kind of status quo that's probably against your nature, against your grain. And so either way you are, explore the otherness. of yourself. And I think that then doesn't put her in a subservient position or an above position. It integrates her as a both and between you and then that creative force of the self that you started with the imaginatio.
Right. Okay. There's some important footnotes here. So let me, I'll read the sentences that they apply to. First is Christ totally overcomes the temptation of the devil, but not the temptation of God to good and reason. And the footnote is Christ was tempted by the devil for 40 days in the desert. And that was from Luke 4, 1 through 13. And then the next sentence says, Christ thus succumbs to cursing. And that's from Matthew 21, 18 to 20. Quote, now in the morning he returned into the city. He hungered, and when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon, but leaves only, and said unto it, let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, how soon is the fig tree withered away? In 1944, Jung wrote, quote, the Christian, my Christian, knows no curse formulas. Indeed, he does not even sanction the cursing of the innocent fig tree by the Rabbi Jesus, unquote. Why I have not adopted the Catholic truth, which is from Collected Works 18, paragraph 1468.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
It struck me there. I mean, hold on, I'm integrated in finish this note. 40 days, 40 days, 40 nights. That comes up so many times biblically. And I never have understood the arbitrariness of it until just right now. And this may be totally an error, but if I look at it just from an arithmetic piece, 40 days is 1.333 repeating months. That equals 4/3 months. So then that's the quaternity over or nestled in or integrating the Trinity underneath. So, so it's interesting. The 4/3 is, I hadn't thought about the quaternity and Trinity in 40 days, but there's the 4/3 months.
And I never heard anyone mention this before. So
and I've never thought it before. I think
you've identified something new that even the central Jungian analyst hadn't noticed yet.
Yeah, I think the 40 days and 40 nights is so assumed, or 40 days, because it's so repetitive. I mean, we all know that. I mean, we all know, oh, it's 40, that's a long time. We never think about, well, what's the significance of the number? And it may not be, but the quaternity over the Trinity as a fraction, the 4/3 months, where the quaternity is nestled in the, and actually that'd be the spirit nestled in the soul.
Right. Okay, so the final two paragraphs here are, during 6 further nights, the spirit of the depths was silent in me, since I swayed between fear, defiance, and nausea, and was wholly the prey of my passion. I could not and did not want to listen to the depths. But on the 7th night, the spirit of the depths spoke to me. Look into your depths, pray to your depths, waken the dead, unquote. But I stood helpless and did not know what I could do. I looked into myself, and the only thing I found within was the memory of earlier dreams, all of which I wrote down without knowing what good this would do. I wanted to throw everything away and return to the light of day, but the spirit stopped me and forced me back into myself. Okay, so there's a famous statement in the movie Chariots of Fire where Eric Liddell is running a quarter-mile race, and he gets tripped up by one of the other competitors intentionally, and still he gets up and successfully wins the race. But as he's running the second part of that race, there's a voiceover in Eric Liddell's voice, which says, "So where does the power come from to see the race through to the end? From within." Okay. And
from within.
right. And so that's true for all of us. Now
then of course the dun 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 dun, dun, and we have to sing the Chariots of Fire
right.
montage background music.
And so there are a few more footnotes here. Let's see, I guess we read those, but 71, Black Book 2, let's see. Look into your depths, pray to your depths, waken the dead. And the footnote reads, this sentence reads in the Black Books, says a voice. On November 21st, Jung had given a presentation at the Zurich Psychoanalytical Society on formulations on the psychology of the unconscious. Okay, so he was studying this, and he was writing this down at the same time he was studying it for his talk.
It's interesting, footnote 70, the Nietzsche wrote that, and even when one has all the virtues, there is still one thing to remember: to send even these virtues to sleep at the proper time, meaning don't get all consumed by these and substitute it for the intellect, which is like, quitting smoking and starting running a marathon. I mean, there's a sports addiction compensating, so that in a sense here, he's like everything in moderation. Well, including moderation, switch that off and make them both work. So it's, in a sense, he's still kind of alluding to the circadian rhythms, regardless of daylight, that operate autonomically in the body. There's a psychological function, I think he's indicating, where even these virtues to sleep at the proper time, meaning don't get all consumed with hubris about now how great and good you are.
Yeah. Okay, so the next chapter is entitled The Desert, and it was written on November 28th, 1913. So at this point, Jung is 16 days into the Red Book, and here's what he writes. Sixth night, my soul leads me into the desert of my own self. I did not think that my soul is a desert, a barren, hot desert, dusty and without drink. The journey leads through hot sand, slowly waiting without a visible goal to hope for. How eerie is this wasteland? It seems to me that the way leads so far away from mankind. I take my way step by step and do not know how long my journey will last. Why is myself a desert? Have I lived too much outside of myself in men and events? Why did I avoid myself? Was I not dear to myself? But I have avoided the place of my soul. I was my thoughts after I was no longer events and other men, but I was not myself confronted with my thoughts. I should also rise up above my thoughts to my own self. My journey goes there, and that is why it leads away from men and events into solitude. Is it solitude to be with oneself? Solitude is true only when the self is a desert. Should
You froze.
no longer trust my thoughts? Only life is true, and only life leads me into the desert. Truly not my thinking. That would that would like to return, truly not my thinking, that would like to return to thoughts, to men and events, since it feels uncanny in the desert. My soul, what am I to do here? But my soul spoke to me and said, wait. I heard the cruel word, torment belongs to the desert. And there are three important footnotes, one of which is the date, November 28th, 1913. And number 73, okay, is it solitude to be with oneself? Solitude is true only when the self is a desert. And in Black Book 2, he says, I hear the words, and inchoate in his own desert, an anchorite in his own desert. The monks in the Syrian desert occur to me. Okay, so he's referring to the fact that in ancient times, monks would go into the desert to find the truth and to have a revelation. And the funny thing is that T.E. Lawrence talks about this in Seven Pillars of Wisdom, where there were a lot of revelations in the desert because people were often in trouble out in the sun. And
well, and if you've ever been lost in nature, above tree line in the desert, then you go into a whole different, it's not survival mode. You kind of have to have thrival mode, but your reasons aren't reasonable. They're life itself. So yeah, that's, you go into the desert, you might have some things running through your psyche that you never would have had before.
Right. And there's one more, the word wait, in quotes, wait. This is his soul speaking to him. Wait. I heard the cruel word, torment belongs to the desert. And the quote, the footnote is, Black Book 2 continues. I think of Christianity in the desert. Physically, those ancients went into the desert. Did they also enter into the desert of their own self? Or was their self not as barren and desolate as mine? There they wrestled with the devil. I wrestle with waiting. It seems to me not less, since it is truly a hot hell. Okay, so.
Well, and that whole, the torment belongs to the desert, going back to, shift gears, put these things to sleep every once in a while when they need to be. The ocean, symbol of the unconscious. Here, this becomes the newbie, where the desert is a symbol of the unconscious because you have no capacity to see all of what's there. And in a sense, the beauty is in the detail. You have to look down to see a little garnet at your feet rather than in the ocean, look at the majesty of the horizon. The horizon in the desert looks like, death.
Okay, continue. Through giving my soul all I could give, I came to the place of the soul and found that this place was a hot desert, desolate and unfruitful. No culture of the mind is enough to make a garden of your soul. I had cultivated my spirit, the spirit of this time in me, but not that spirit of the depths that turns to the things of the soul, the world of the soul. The soul has its own peculiar world. Only the self enters in there, or the man who has completely become his self. He who is neither in events nor in men, nor in his thoughts. Through the turning of my desire from things and men, I turned myself away from things and men, but that is precisely how I became the secure prey of my thoughts. Yes, I wholly became my thoughts. So, go ahead.
No, you
go ahead.
Well, it's interesting, this whole desert ocean piece that's come to me here, because there's another piece about the 5 days I won't go into, because now I've got this number survey running in the sub program in my head. But the desert, if I looked at the desert, as it meets the ocean. Well, the desert allegedly stops at the coastline, which is always slightly moving, tide comes in, tide goes out. But then you have the ocean. But what's interesting is then the unseen, quote unquote, desert is then the earth, the vessel of the ocean. So, because the desert, as the sand goes down below the ocean, the desert is vesseling the ocean in a big, earth scale way. He's really bringing the both and for me here together of how these things are operating together rather than operating. They're interdependent rather than independent.
Right. Now, Kathy Kerr has brought to my attention that I've frozen on the screen, and
for her as well. It was right at, but I was not myself, I think, confronted with my thoughts and then you came back in at, I think, it is a deception that I can no longer trust my thoughts. It was about half of that paragraph. If she had the same experience.
All right. Tell me again where it is, and let's read it.
Go back to the top of the page, 236. Just past.
I'm on 142 in this book. We're looking at the reader's edition.
So let me see. Go back one. Go to basically the page that has experiences in the desert, starting in the second column.
Yeah.
Go to the top of the left column. And in that paragraph, I think you froze right after I was no longer events and other men. And then came back in about 3/4 of the paragraph.
How does the paragraph begin?
On the previous page, why is myself a desert? Have I lived too much outside of myself and men and events? The second paragraph of the desert.
Okay, and where in that paragraph is it that I was frozen?
I think it was right after I was no longer events and other men. I think you froze at about, but I was not of myself, right there around, I think. As I looked up, and if she had the same experience, then it happened across the board.
All right. Well, I buy the extra super duper Comcast connectivity, but apparently that too is not enough. Okay. So let me read that. Again, but I have avoided the place of my soul. I was my thoughts after I was no longer events and other men, but I was not myself, confronted with my thoughts. I should also rise up above my thoughts to my own self. My journey goes there, and that is why it leads me from men and events into solitude. Is it solitude to be with oneself? Solitude is true only when the self is a desert. Should I also make a garden out of the desert? Should I people a desolate land? Should I open the airy magic garden of the wilderness? What leads me into the desert, and what aim do I have there? Is it a deception that I can no longer trust my thoughts? Only life is true, and only life leads me into the desert. Truly not my thinking that would like to return to its thoughts, to men and events, since it feels uncanny in the desert. My soul, what am I to do here? But my soul spoke to me and said, wait, I hear the cruel word. Torment belongs in the desert. Now, did I get it all?
Yeah, I think you did. And it's interesting when you read it this time, you said, what aim do I have there? And the text was, what am I to do there? And actually they have the same meaning, because there's this consciousness portion of that sentence conceptually. So it was a nice slip that I think gave it a little more robust.
Okay, well, I am having a few vision anomalies here as I'm reading, so I'm figuring another year or two, and this may have to stop. But I hope that covers it.
Yeah, I think it does.
Because this is a very important paragraph here, because
Well, does Kathy concur?
I don't know.
See if
So
she-
Kathy, do you concur that I've covered it? I hope so. But I mean, the point of here is I wanted to be he wanted to be with men and events. And so it's like many of us who are glued to the news channels wanting to be in the actual events themselves, or maybe not wanting to be, but at least aware of them. It's kind of like the news at 11, blood at 11, where there's a tease for the 11 o'clock news, and it's invariably about some awful event, and that's eyewitness news. And the reason it is, and the reason people are attracted to that, is because you can listen to the story about some awful event, and then you can say, oh, okay, I'm okay because that isn't happening to me. Right.
Yeah.
And
stay tuned, more death and suffering to come.
right. And so this morning we had the Chinese New Year shooting out in Monterey Park, I believe, in California, where 10 were killed and another 10 were injured. And we can know that fact, and it's an awful fact, but we're okay because we're talking about it here now.
Right.
And so that's why many people are attracted to that, but it doesn't make it nicer.
Well,
and
no,
and we have to go into the desert, into our soul, to figure out what it is that has to be done to resolve those types of issues.
well, it's interesting, shall I make a garden of the desolate or of the desert, however it goes in this, reminds me of that new, project, hundreds of kilometers long through the desert. It's the mirrored city that's basically one long caravanserai, the little house for travelers of the new city being built across the Middle Eastern desert. And then stadiums and things are popping up, it seems, around where it's going to be. So making a garden out of the desert is occurring.
Yeah. Right. And Kathy says we're good. She says, I also have a copy of the reader's edition if you ever want an additional readers throughout the following months. And so, Kathy, I'm going to send you the link to receive the notices right now, and so that you can join us. And I think I have your email address. So while Jordan speaks, I will forward the link to our panel. If you want to join us today, that would be great, because I see my reading days may be numbered. And so,
well, then we'll have to keep you for comments. So you'll be the
we'll love to have you for comment. And I don't know if Nancy wants to do that, but anyway, if Kathy is a volunteer.
If your vision goes, then you have to be the overlord, the overseer, and you just listen and talk.
Right. Okay. So anyway, Jordan, you're going to read this part 2 of this segment now.
Also, I also had to detach myself from my thoughts through turning my desire away from them, and at once I noticed that myself became a desert, where only the sun of unquiet desire burned. I was overwhelmed by the endless infertility of this desert. Even if something could have thrived there, the creative power of desire was still absent. Wherever the creative power of desire is, there springs the soil's own seed. But do not forget to wait. Did you not see that when your creative force turned to the world, how the dead things moved under it and through it, how they grew and prospered, and how your thoughts flowed in rich rivers? If your creative force now turns to the place of the soul, you will see how your soul becomes green and how its field bears wonderful fruit. Nobody can spare themselves the waiting, and most will be unable to bear this torment, but will throw themselves with greed back at men, things, and thoughts, whose slaves they will become from then on. Since then, it will have been clearly proved that this man is incapable of enduring beyond things, people, and thoughts. And they will hence become his master, and he will become their fool, since he cannot be without them, not until even his soul has become a fruitful field. Also, he whose soul is a garden needs things, men, and thoughts, but he is their friend and not their slave and fool. Continuing, everything to come was already in images. To find their soul, the ancients went into the desert. This is footnote, paragraph 75. Around 285, that'd be AD or CE, St. Anthony went to live as a hermit in the Egyptian desert, and other hermits followed, whom he and Pachomius organized into a community. This formed the basis of Christian monasticism, which spread to the Palestinian and Syrian deserts. In the 4th century, there were thousands of monks in the Egyptian desert.
Right. And there is, to this day, a very important monastery called St. Catherine's Monastery, I believe, right in the middle of the Sinai Desert. And it is from that monastery that the first image that we have anywhere of Jesus Christ was saved. It actually came. Everyone believes today that it was made in Istanbul, and it was a very common thing. But all of them from that time were lost, except this one version of it, which is that was saved in this monastery called St. Catherine's in the middle of the Sinai Desert. And so it's called Sinai Jesus. I'll see if I can find it right now.
Okay. And I'll continue. Ahead. So continuing in this paragraph, this is an image. The ancients lived their symbols, since the world has not yet become real for them. Thus they went into solitude of the desert to teach us the place of the soul is a lonely desert. There they found the abundance of visions, the fruits of the desert, the wondrous flowers of the soul. Think diligently about the images that the ancients have left behind. They show the way of what is to come. Look back at the collapse of empires, of growth and death, of the desert and monasteries. They are the images of what is to come. Everything has been foretold, but who knows how to interpret it? When you say that the place of the soul is not, then it is not. When you say that the place of the soul is not, then it is not. But if you say that the soul is, then it is. Notice what the ancients said in images. The word is a creative act. The ancients said, in the beginning was the word, capital W word. Consider this and think upon it. The words that oscillate between nonsense and supreme meaning are the oldest and truest.
Right on. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen because I have found Sinai Jesus. And what is significant about this image, among other things, and of course, Jesus is holding a copy of the Bible, but what's most significant about this image is that Jesus's right eye is, which refers to the left brain, is looking straight at you, while his left eye, which refers to the right brain, is looking inside. Okay, so he doesn't have both of his eyes looking at you. So Jesus was always connected with the unconscious, and that was known in the 6th century at least, and probably much earlier. And there were probably earlier images around, but none have been found except at St. Catherine's Monastery.
Well, and those eyes too. I mean, the one on the left of the picture, his right eye, is consciously looking right at you, and
Right.
the other, the right eye, left eye, right in the picture. Look at how black it is. It's like it is, instead of a color, it's a pupil. And if Joseph Campbell, Eyes are the inroads to the soul, where that's an emanation of the creative wellspring, not good and evil. This is conscious and unconscious.
Absolutely.
And then his hand, his right hand, hanging up like that. I'm not sure which mudra that is.
But it is a mudra that probably came out of the Hindu and Buddhist world.
It is. And again, the synchronicity is funny. I saw a cartoon 2 weeks ago with this picture and that hand, except it cast a shadow and he was making a rabbit, on the wall. So,
people will pollute everything.
Yeah. I don't know how I guess everyone just sends me oh, look, we played it with it this way.
Yeah. Okay. And I just want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that I have commented at length on John 1 through 14, which is the segment that begins, in the beginning was the Word. That is by no means the first words in the Bible. It's the first words of the Gospel of John, who was the third apostle mentioned in the New Testament. And so what one needs to understand is that the Bible is a symbol, and all the words in the Bible are a symbol. So on the face of it, to the rational mind, it's just these words on a page. But behind those words are symbols, nothing more, symbols of something else. Behind those words are everything in Judaism, Christianity, and quite a lot of Islam is in the Bible. And so one has to understand that when it says in the beginning was the Word is only a symbol for what's behind it. And I struggled with that for a very long time. And at one point when I was doing my talk called Finding the Living God, I said to myself, well, why is in the beginning was the Word? Wasn't there something before the Word? And so I just Googled that, and lo and behold, up comes this segment of the Bible, the chapter 1 of the book of John, verses 1 through 14. I actually did a lovely calligraphy of that, which probably could be purchased from me in print form for about $50. I'll share that with you. but I'm not hawking it here. I just mentioned
That's,
that it exists.
well, no,
I actually did it. I actually did it for my daughter for her birthday, but it's I've given a few copies away to close friends, and so the money would be only to cover the cost of the Giclée print and nothing more. So
well, this almost towards the end of this portion of the reading, think diligently about the images that the ancients have left behind. They show the way of what is to come. Look back at the collapse of empires, of growth and death, of the deserts and monasteries. They are the images of what is to come. Everything has been foretold, but who knows how to interpret it? And what's interesting, it reminds me of Louis Kahn, the architect, was fond of saying, what has been, what has always been, what is has always been, and what will be has always been. And it's interesting. I wonder if he was inspired by that or had discovered it, on his own from the things that have always been from the unconscious and such.
right. So now we're up to chapter 5, I believe. And
Experience
we
desert.
probably can get through it. What I am going to do is read the first segment of it, which is the title of this chapter is Experiences in the Desert, and it's dated December 11th, 1913. So just 30 days after Dr. Jung began the process.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Fill this. Mute.
All right. So experiences in the desert. After a hard struggle, I have come to a piece of the way nearer to you. How hard this struggle was. I had fallen into an undergrowth of doubt, confusion, and scorn. I recognized that I must be alone with my soul. I come with empty hands to you, my soul. What do you want to hear? But my soul spoke to me and said, if you come to a friend, do you come to take? I knew that this should not be so, but it seems to me that I am poor and empty. I would like to sit down near you and at least feel the breath of your animating presence. My way is hot. My way is hot sand. All day long, sandy, dusty paths. My patience is sometimes weak, and once I despaired of myself, as you know. My soul answered and said, quote, you speak to me as if you were a child complaining to its mother. I am not your mother, unquote. I do not want to complain, but let me say to you that mine is a long and dusty road. You are to me like a shady tree in the wilderness. I would like to enjoy your shade, but my soul answered, quote, you are pleasure seeking. Where is your patience? Your time has not yet run its course. Have you forgotten why you went into the desert? Unquote. My faith is weak. My face is blind from all the shimmering blaze of the desert sun. The heat lies on me like lead. Thirst torments me. I dare not think how unending long my way is. And above all, I see nothing in front of me. But the soul answered, quote, you speak as if you still learned nothing. Can you not wait? Should everything fall into your lap, ripe and finished? You are full. Yes, you teem with intentions and desirousness. Do you still not know that the way to truth stands open only to those without intentions? Unquote. I know that everything you say, oh my soul, is also my thought, but I hardly live according to it. The soul said, quote, how, tell me, do you then believe that your thoughts should help you? I would always like to refer to the fact that that's unquote. So I'll read it again. Here's the soul speaking. How, tell me, do you then believe that your thoughts should help you? Unquote. I would always like to refer to the fact that I am a human being, just a human being who is weak and sometimes does not do his best. But the soul said, quote, is this what you think it means to be human? Unquote. You are hard, my soul, but you are right. How little we still commit ourselves to living. We should grow like a tree that likewise does not know its law. We tie ourselves up with intentions, not mindful of the fact that intention is the limitation. Yes, the exclusion of life. We believe that we can illuminate the darkness with an intention, and in that way aim past the light. How can we presume to want to know in advance from where the light will come to us? Let us bring only one complaint before you. I suffer from scorn, my own scorn. But my soul said to me, quote, do you think little of yourself? Unquote. I do not believe so, my soul answered. Quote, then listen, do you think little of me? Do you still not know that you are not writing a book to feed your vanity, but that you are speaking with me? How can you suffer from scorn if you address me with those words that I give you? Do you know then who I am? Have you grasped me, defined me, and made me into a dead formula? Have you measured the depths of my chasms and explored all the ways down which I am yet going to lead you? Scorn cannot challenge you if you are not vain in the marrow of your bones. Your truth is hard, unquote. Your truth is hard. I want to lay down my vanity before you since it blinds me. See, that is why I also believed my hands were empty when I came to you today. I did not consider that it is you who fills empty hands, if only they want to stretch out. Yet they do not want to. I did not know that I am your vessel, empty without you, but brimming over with you. Okay, so that's that segment. I'm going to take a short break here.
Okay, this is really important to me. I remember back in 1995 or 1996, I was at a get together and someone was talking about their intentions and manifesting, and I turned around and said, intention is overrated. It's simply more important than the way it comes across. And of course, that was heresy to most people. But a friend of mine turned around on his 4-foot by 8-foot whiteboard and just wrote it down. And I wouldn't have remembered it if he didn't. But this whole passage here, where we believe that we can illuminate the darkness with an intention, and in that way aim past the light. How can we presume to want to know in advance from where the light will come to us? And he continues that in footnote 78, where in Commentary on the Secrets of the Golden Flower, 1929, Jung criticized the Western tendency to turn everything into methods and intentions. The cardinal lesson, as presented by the Chinese texts and by Meister Eckhart, was that of allowing psychic events to happen of their own accord. That would be like that oak tree growing without knowledge of its own law. In quotes, letting things happen, the action through non-action, the letting go of oneself. Meister Eckhart became the key for me that succeeded in opening the door to the way. One must be able to psychically let things happen. Collected Works, Volume 13, paragraph 20. that's of chief interest to me there, because I think that the whole, I don't want to cap on any particular system, but I think that a lot of people substitute intentions for being terrified, and they give them a footing. And I think in that sense, that's a wonderful utility, a great tool. But if I establish a goal, in a sense, I've completed it in my mind, and it's not just a series of tasks. It sets me onto the journey of achieving that intention or that goal. Instead of, oh, I checked that off the list, it's to get the motivation started. But this piece in the footnote where the cardinal lesson was that of allowing psychic events to happen of their own accord, letting things happen, the action through non-action, the letting go of oneself, of Meister Eckhart, became the key for me, Jung, that succeeded in opening the door to the way. One must be able to psychically let things happen. And that just gives, I don't necessarily feel vindicated because I didn't feel shamed, but when I just blurted out back in 1995 or whenever it was, at that get together, everyone's talking about intentions and manifestation, and for me, the heretic turns around and says intentions are all overrated. It's far more important simply the way they come across. Well, this really gives a lot of credence, I think, to the ability of letting go, where I may have intentions, but it's more important that I act them, which goes back to Jung's quote of, you aren't what you say you're going to do, you are what you do. So this was an important passage, especially with that footnote for me.
Right. Did you read the footnote 78?
I did.
Yeah. Okay. When Jung talks about, and I have often noted in my own life, that if you go to your unconscious and look at it, it will come alive. Okay, it is alive, but it's not alive in the physical sense of our world until you look at it. And then when you look at it, it will green and it will respond to you. And so a practical example that relates to my life is that I had sort of disavowed both of my grandfathers for different reasons. I disavowed my maternal grandfather because he was quite bigoted, and I didn't approve of his bigotry. And yet he lived a life, and it was quite obviously an important life to me because he was my grandfather. But he went through really serious challenges in his life. The most significant of which, I mean, he worked for 50 years on the Pennsylvania Railroad. But one of the significant things that happened to him, and he was born actually about the same year as Carl Jung was born. He was engaged to a woman in 1918 who, together with her 4 sisters, all died from the Spanish flu. And therefore, a year or 2 later, he married my grandmother, which made me possible, of course. And so I obviously have to respect him for getting through that very dark time of his life. It must have been very dark. And he was a man of his time, very much as Jung was a man of his time. They were both patriarchs. And the other was my paternal grandfather, who was an alcoholic. And I didn't really appreciate him either. But when I looked at him and I realized that he was the guy that managed to get my father into the Naval Academy in 1942. And the result of that fact was that my father spent World War II at the Naval Academy and graduated in 1945, right at the end of the war. And so that too made me possible. And so we have to look back at these ancestors of ours and see what they had to deal with. Both of my grandmothers also had such difficult experiences as well, but I won't go into that now.
Well, I think that brings up the importance of, I mean, I keep dropping back into architecture and structural engineering and then countering it. The idea of a strong foundation is pretty much ancestors, and you're not standing on cured concrete that's stable and flat. You're standing on previously alive and living features. So in a sense, soil plasticity, which is how the soil moves like water, slowly, but it does. The earth is always moving. The soil is always moving. Some places better than others or more than others. But that foundation you bring up of these malleable people who went through the darknesses, in that sense, there's a very fluid foundation. And in a sense, it's an ancient ocean within that helps the personal unconscious, to then not just grasp and grapple with these previous likes, dislikes, scorns, as it were, but then to mine the treasure from the trouble. And you see the gold of where, your whole life up to this point, your whole life up to this point based on your whole lineage of experience up to this point.
Well, absolutely. And as I think about it, all of our ancestors did two things successfully. They survived until they reproduced. Okay, that's true going back to single-celled organisms. Every one of our ancestors in their millions, and that's true of all of us, survived until they reproduced. And
I would add to that the ones who didn't reproduce influenced others who did, which then was carried forward too.
Right. So all of us represent the hopes and fears of our ancestors. Okay, all of us. And what Jung recognized at this time, where he was on the cusp of World War I, and much of the Red Book was started in the heat of World War I, was that it is in the clash of ideas and the clash of, and literally our blood, that causes us to find the better way. And so, for example, in the context of the shooting this morning, there is a solution to much of our shooting in the United States, and that is to just simply read the Second Amendment properly, because the first four words of the Second Amendment are a well-regulated militia, and
which we already have.
Yes, and we have a well-regulated militia. It's called the National Guard, and the purpose of that amendment to the Constitution of the United States was to provide for a well-regulated militia, just as they do in Switzerland now. In Switzerland, every adult male is issued by the government a rifle and a complete set of ammunition in a box. They're sealed, and they're not allowed to open them unless there's a national emergency. Mm-hmm. So every adult male has in his possession a rifle and the ammunition to use in it to defend the country, but no one goes into it. And so they don't have a solution problem or a shooting problem like we have in the United States. And so it is the clash of all these things, regretfully, the blood of many innocents, that will ultimately lead the United States and the Supreme Court. I'm not saying anytime soon. It may, the Supreme Court is going to probably have to completely turn over at least one time before this correct reading of the Second Amendment can be applied. But the truth is that the founding fathers lived at a time when rifles were single shot and you had to reload it yourself each time. And their intention was to make a militia available to the federal government, and their intention was not to have every guy out there have a Uzi or some other automatic weapon. That was not their intention at all, and no conscious person would argue that was their intention. But nonetheless, we have what we have, so we are going to have to suffer the pain and blood of our innocence in the United States until we can get our psyches around the fact that the Second Amendment is about a militia and nothing else. A well-regulated.
Well, yeah, when I hear people going off about the Second Amendment and, I have the right to bear arms, and I always say, well, that's a compensatory interpretation you have for a lack of testosterone. And they went, well, what do you mean? I said, you have the right to bear arms. Look, I already have bear arms. I don't take hormones. I guess I take hormones. So it's like, but the right to bear arms, like, I've got bear arms. But you're right. I mean, that whole militia piece, it's not that needs to be struck or removed. I think it needs to be more universally understood as to the intent of what that provides. And in that sense, your Swiss example of every adult male has a rifle and a sealed pack of bullets. Well, that's an implementation procedure of that kind of policy indication.
Right. Okay, so we're going to read up till the end of this chapter, and then we'll talk about what's in the next chapter, but we're not going to go into it. So I'll let you read this time.
So we're right up to let me bring one complaint before you, correct?
No, we are at point at 2.
2, yeah, this was
my 25th. Go ahead.
This was my 25th night in the desert. This is how long it took my soul to awaken from a shadowy being to her own life until she could approach me as a freestanding being separate from me. And I received hard but salutary words from her. I needed that taking in hand, since I could not overcome the scorn within me. And now italicized. The spirit of this time considers itself extremely clever, like every such spirit of the time. But wisdom is simple-mindedness. Wisdom is simple-minded, not just simple. Because of this, the clever person mocks wisdom, since mockery is his weapon. He uses the pointed, poisonous weapon because he is struck by naive wisdom. If he were not struck, he would not need the weapon. Only in the desert do we become aware of our terrible simple-mindedness, but we are afraid of admitting it. In quotes, that is why we are scornful. But mockery does not attain simple-mindedness. The mockery falls on the mocker. And in the desert, where no one hears and answers, he suffocates from his own scorn. The cleverer you are, the more foolish your simple-mindedness. The totally clever are total fools in their simple-mindedness. We cannot save ourselves from the cleverness of the spirit of this time through increasing our cleverness, but through accepting what our cleverness hates most, namely simple-mindedness. Yet we do not want to be artificial fools because we have fallen simple-mindedness. Rather, we will be clever fools. That leads to the supreme meaning. Cleverness couples itself with intention. Simple-mindedness knows no intention. Cleverness conquers the world, but simple-mindedness the soul. So take on the vow of poverty of spirit in order to partake of the soul. And footnote 79, Christ preached, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," from Matthew 5, verse 3. In a number of Christian communities, members take a vow of poverty. In 1934, Jung wrote, "Just as in Christianity, the vow of worldly poverty turned the mind away from the riches of this earth, so spiritual poverty seeks to renounce the false riches of the spirit in order to withdraw not only from the sorry remnants, which today call themselves the Protestant churches of a great past, but also from all the allurements of exotic aromas, in order, finally, to turn back to itself, where in the cold light of consciousness, the blank barrenness of the world reaches to the very stars." And that's from On the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, Collective Works, Volume 9, paragraph 29.
Volume 9, Part 1.
Yes. Volume 9, Part 1.
Right. Right. That distinction is important because there are actually two books.
Two books.
One is the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, which is Volume 1, and Volume 2 is Ion, which is also an extremely important book.
So then the last little piece, reread that sentence. So take on the vow of poverty of spirit in order to partake of the soul. Against this, the scorn of my cleverness rose up. Many will laugh at my foolishness, but no one will laugh more than I laughed at myself. So I overcame scorn, but when I'd overcome it, I was near to my soul, and she could speak to me, and I was soon to see the desert becoming green. And there's footnote 80 in there, which is, the draft continues, "This too is an image of the ancients, that they lived and think symbolically. They renounced wealth in order to have a share of the voluntary poverty of the soul, of their souls. Therefore, I had to grant my soul the most extreme poverty and need, and the scorn of my cleverness rose up against this." And that was from page 47 of that same 9.1.
Right.
I think what jumps at me, if I may,
Sure.
Where is it? We cannot save ourselves from the cleverness of the spirit of this time. And then he drops down further to cleverness couples itself with intention. And then cleverness conquers the world, but simple-mindedness the soul. And so when I take on the vow of poverty of spirit, it feels like he's starting to stop the tide of the worldly spirit and give a place for then the soul to pour out into that concoction, the crucible of life. And instead of the expectations and the consciousness of the spirit of the time continually deceiving, as it were. So, comments on YouTube? Did you?
Let's see.
You just had a nice funny grimace, like something funny happened.
Yeah, John T. says the fruit older than the tree from which it is plucked. And she goes on, Jung wrestles ideas like a judoka. Jordan knows silent warlike steps. My family tree is a stump if we survived it seems accidentally. Very often we or our ancestors have survived accidentally. Okay, in other words, my family on my father's side is among the first European Americans. They came to the New World in 1625. And And they suffered through lots
Mhm.
since then, but they came in leaky boats, and they could easily have drowned in the Atlantic very easily.
Easily. I love that quote, the fruit older than the tree that produced it. I mean, it really just calls that. It's such a great way to talk about the ancestral lineage of
Yeah,
any of us, that not just standing on the shoulders of our parents or our mentors or mistresses kind of thing. It's that each of us, when we enter that spirit soul connection, are then older than what made us, and we access that ancestral lineage. The fruit older than the tree that produced it. That's just beautiful.
right. And this is why all human beings have more or less the same archetypes within us. I saw some images of a very ancient tribe in Central Africa, uh, which has primitive behaviors and so on. But very interestingly, the features of these people are very similar to Japanese features, for example. And so it's very clear that the Japanese ultimately descended from these Aboriginal people in Central Africa, and went through lots of changes, obviously, from the time of the primitives, which still live on the earth, and the present day Japanese. There are lots of iterations and so on. And so all those iterations have made us what we are. But now there's a new age dawning, and it's symbolized by everybody going around with their nose in a cell phone, because everybody's trying to figure out what the new age is going to be. And the fact is, you're going to have to get your nose out of the cell phone and start doing something in order to know the answer to that.
And that reminds me of the old quote of art drives culture, technology simply supports it. And then I would add, like a toothpick after dinner. I mean, that's it. Look at the toothpick; it's the color. I mean,
right. So I have no idea how long it will take for the American people to wake up sufficiently to go back and reinterpret the Second Amendment of the Constitution properly. It probably is going to take thousands of deaths more, if not tens of thousands. But ultimately, we will see the error in our ways of the current interpretation of the Constitution by at least half of our population in the United States. And, there's actually no reason to have so many shooting deaths. There almost are never shootings in Singapore or Taiwan. It's because they have very strict laws about firearms. Doesn't mean that they don't have firearms, but it does mean that they woke up enough to make it difficult to use them in crimes and to use them for suicide and all kinds of other things that people use firearms for.
Well, I will often refer to the gun problem in America as the invisible civil war, and there are no sides. There's many sides as there are. There's all these sides, as many as there are the people who are shooters, and then there's the people who innocently get shot. And what's interesting about that is it's an invisible guerrilla war that's, I think, significant of the psychic epidemic of throughout the country, and the revisioning of the interpretation of the Second Amendment. It can be raw at first and all this, but it needs to occur. And what I'm reminded of is the Ukrainians don't really have a navy. So
Yeah.
what did they do? They took rocket launchers and put them on barges and floated out and destroyed the Russian fleet. I mean, so, you see this wobbly barge and this tractor of a rocket launcher that's been driven onto it. And then they take this barge out to sea and boom, they sink that ship, and it's more than just tractors stealing tanks. The technology simply supports what they're doing. But what's interesting is they are constantly in a state of the creative drive with their utilities. They're not utilizing them with the limitations of them. It's like, oh, this thing needs to, this many PSI ground pressure. No, that barge can handle that much weight. It's cool, and if you've seen the picture,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's when it's not a small rocket launcher. It was I think a Neptune missile on it,
Mhm.
parked on a barge that was out at sea. And it was parked at an angle, almost like you and I would stand at an angle on a rocking ship to keep footing, so as not to get pendulum action and topple the thing over. So it was creative through and through. And at first it looked raw, and then I went, no, it looks shiny and brilliant. I mean, and it worked. So,
Right. Um, so modern navies are probably of little value anymore. Unless you're talking about the high seas or something, you certainly can't be near a coastline. And
well, no, I mean, you take a little dinghy out with 50 drones on it, and you
right,
just throw them all up, and it's all changed, and it's nothing. I mean, it's nothing new to the U.S. military. I mean, but it's the kind of thing where it's gone back to the ability of, say, the Swiss. If the whole country each has a rifle and a sealed box of ammunition, at any point they can all step out their front door, boom, and then go back to dinner.
right.
Because it's just doing it right.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we just have to rely on the luck of the draw. For example, I'm doing some substitute teaching right now, and one of my duties is to monitor the cafeteria. And one of the first things I do every day when I walk into the cafeteria is I look at the exits and consider what I would do if a shooter came in. And obviously I know that I'm no spring chicken, so I tell myself I would sacrifice myself for these 11 and 12-year-olds. But you never know until you're actually in the event.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't realize, because I always called it, oh no, it's not military defensible space thinking, it's building code analysis. And then one year I realized, I walked in, I'm like, I know building code forwards and backwards so well that no, it can't be, because I don't need to do that analysis. I can walk in and go, yeah, it meets code, we're fine there, move on. So why am I still focused so much on those? And what it simply was just what you said, military defensible space. I'm walking in not out of paranoia looking for the exits. I'm making sure that my strategy includes the tools that are available to me.
Right. So all of us may pray that we're not one of the unfortunate ones when the fickle finger of fate points at us when there's a shooter about. Obviously, all of us that are here talking about this have been so lucky so far, but you can never know in these times. And so we have to understand what it means, what our politics means, and how things ultimately change only by blood, which is one of the central themes of the Red Book.
Well, and I think it's important for people to understand how important they each are. Because, for example, if I'm sitting there in my neighborhood, right, and I go out somewhere else, and Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, somebody like, I know they're not together, but walk by, and like, oh wow, look, movie star. Kind of, I'm not starstruck, but it's like, oh look. But if they were my next door neighbors, there's whatever, they're just my neighbors. I mean, so there's a minimizing things that are close to us, which I find can decrease the observance of, check the exits. And I think that understanding that fickle finger of fate, it's not going to change it because it's still a fickle finger of fate, but the ability to be observant.
Right.
I was walking, leaving the plaza days ago. I was walking out and it was dark, and this woman was walking out from one of the shops, and I said, well, shall I walk you to your car? Because I'm parked further than you, I'm guaranteed, because you're parked right here in the front. And she goes, oh, that'd be great. So we're walking, we're just chatting. Well, she clicks her alarm and walks right past her car, because there's another model of the same white vehicle, 2 forward. And I stopped and I went, I think this is your car. And she goes, you are psychic. I said, no, I'm just observant. When you push the button, those lights lit up. Yeah. Oh, I thought that was my car. Well, it's the kind of thing of on your cell phone, it's worse than being drunk. On your texting in the car, worse than that, because you actually are blinded, literally, because you're so focused on what you're doing. But that one little piece, it struck me, no slander against her, but a testament to, if you're too focused on an expectation, here, I'm looking for my car, click it, click, oh, maybe I need a new battery in the alarm. Well, no, you had already walked past it. So she didn't see the lights that blinked. Whereas you're seeing the streamer moving around like.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm happy to report that my floater from this morning has already significantly diminished. And
good.
Doesn't seem like it's going to interfere with my vision on a long-term basis, but it can be quite scary when you see something. What I'm talking about is when you see something that seems like a hair or something like that in your eye all the time,
right?
And so no matter where you look,
yeah, every time you blink, it comes back to the middle, kind of thing. Oh, you froze up.
This floater 30 degrees off.
Yep.
They can be quite serious, or they can just sort of go away.
Sometimes because that's you have to move the goop. And then sometimes there's those little cellular segmented, and every time you blink, they come right back to the.
And I had another one in my left eye for a couple of years, but it seems to have diminished also now. But anyway, so we'll see everybody next week, and it is going to be a heck of a time, because we're going to be talking about December 12th, 1913. So again, about 7.5 months before the beginning of World War I. And the title of the chapter is Descent into Hell in the Future. That's a fairly long chapter, so we'll probably only cover that next week. Descent into Hell in the Future.
1913, wasn't Franz Ferdinand assassinated in 1917?
No, 1914.
14. Okay, I got that wrong.
He was assassinated, I think, June the 28th, 1914. Okay. But his assassination started a chain reaction that resulted in the beginning of hostilities of World War I on August the 1st. Right. And it's very important to Jung in terms of his psychic development, because his 12 prefiguration dreams and events culminated with a paper that he was reading on, I think, on schizophrenia in Aberdeen, Scotland. And he had dreamed that he would be in a foreign land and he would have to return on a fast boat and it would be very cold. And he said in the event, that's actually what happened. And so he was scheduled to take a ship back to the mainland of Europe, probably to Amsterdam or somewhere. And he said he was the happiest person in the world that day because he knew that he had connected to the collective unconscious, and that he wasn't going crazy at that point.
Yeah, and the thing that was strange and terrifying to him occurred, and then it actually occurred and was a confirmation rather than declination of what he's working on.
So we've been reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung and the Reader's Edition. The next week's section will be starting on page 146, the descent into hell in the future. And so we look forward to seeing you all then. And if you haven't seen it, I urge you to go look at the video that we did yesterday for our Wisdom Path colloquia, for a book called The Schizophrenia Complex. Usually we don't talk about clinical psychology here in this YouTube channel, but Eve Moran wrote a book that crosses over between what I would call normal human life and schizophrenia. So it's a very valuable thing that will help you understand schizophrenia and what can happen to you if you encounter a schizophrenic in your life. It's very, very important. And
I love that she's transcended Jung to evolve Jung, but from her own place. It's not like she's jumping on his bandwagon and then evolving. She's doing what he did. She's coming from her own place of creation. Right. And in that sense, providing a wonderfully valuable, our currency of value psychologically. True. That's, I think, great to amend the soil of what we know about psychology.
Yep, absolutely. And so it's a very valuable addition to this YouTube channel. I hope you'll take a look at it. And let's see, do I still have the link for it?
And actually, I'd say she's growing flowers more than just that.
Yeah, actually, I do have the link to it, so I'm going to put that in the YouTube chat here. This is a link to yesterday's conversation, which was quite popular. And we've had, as of now, 261 views of the video since it was posted 19 hours ago. So that counts as a pretty powerful wisdom path conversation. Obviously,
well, it goes to Chiron's conscientious marketing department. I mean, it's one of their books, fine, but I got an email from them about the same time as I got one from you advertising yesterday's Wisdom Colloquia. And a lot of publishers do not keep track that hard on their books goings about. And I think that to me was a great support, not only of the work, but to me a savvy consciousness of Chiron, because it's self-promotion, but not self-aggrandizing. It's
right. And right. And the publisher or the general manager of Chiron did write to me about 2 months ago when this book first came out and urged me to include her in our Wisdom Path colloquia.
Yeah, and I appreciate that he did that.
Yeah, she.
Oh, she.
Her name is Jennifer Fitzgerald.
Oh, okay, it's not the, okay,
It's not the publishers, it's the general manager of Chiron Publications that wrote to me. So in any case, thank you all for being here this week, and we will be back again next week. And for those of you who are in the advanced reading group, we'll see you on Wednesday. So take care
Okay.
now.